He wasn't a record chaser. He wasn't an elite athlete. He was a chartered accountant from Elora in Canada with a lifelong itch to do something more. At 58, he strapped on skis, clipped into a harness, and dragged a sled across the most unforgiving landscape on Earth, 900 kilometres to the South Pole. He nearly froze on a Russian mountain. He cycled across the Australian outback twice, climbed some of the world's highest peaks, not because anyone told him to, but because a childhood obsession with Shackleton never let go. Then one night, in a garage showing adventure films to a few friends, he had an idea. What if the spark that lit his fire could light someone else's? Welcome to Why Do You Think You Could Do That? I'm Sam Penny, and this is Ian Evans. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Pleasure to be here.
And I'm really looking forward to diving into this because you are one of these people who seems to be constantly putting yourself outside your comfort zone. You've had so many adventures, and it's not just one particular theme. There's so many different styles of adventures that you've been going through. Before we dive into those, I want to go back into your childhood because you're an accountant, you've got the soul of an explorer. But firstly, where did you grow up and what kind of childhood did you have?
I grew up in a place called Shrewsbury in the UK, a fairly medium-sized town in the centre of the UK. Very happy upbringing, normal upbringing, loving family and everything like that. Always belonged to the Scouts, did lots of camping, did lots of hiking and stuff like that. But I ended up hating school very much when I was a teenager and left school early, really didn't finish grade 13 as it would be, and went off and did my own thing. And that's really where all of that started, and had to get some work. So I became a clerk in an accountant's office. I liked it. I seemed to be good at it, and eventually qualified as a chartered accountant, which is unusual because I don't think you can do that today. That was working at night and stuff. So that's that initial strange thing that I went through. I also tried to be a professional cricketer when I was 17. Maybe I would have done better than the English team that's just over in Australia right now, but that didn't work out either. So I tried a few things and ended up as a chartered accountant, qualifying at 25, the same as a whole bunch of other people. So that's the early days, and many happy memories, and crazy way to do it, but I ended up in a good spot.
I love doing my research for each of my interviews because it really throws up some obscure things. And one of the things in my research, and the team said, ask him about when he was a kid climbing onto the roof of the shed at the age of 3. What's that about?
Well, it's a little bit the same as going to a cycle rink at a seaside resort in the UK, and always cycling and being so bored with cycling with the other kids, I went round the other way, and they were all terrorized, and I got banned from the cycling rink, and I was like 5 at that stage. So it's doing something that I just saw the ladder. My father was having lunch, and I thought, why not? I really didn't think it through. I just thought, why not? And went and sat on the top of the roof. And so it didn't scare me. It didn't frighten me. It was kind of interesting, but it was something I'd never done. But why couldn't I do that?
Fair enough. It's interesting. It was only yesterday I was using Google Street View or whatever it's called, looking back on my childhood home in a suburb in Canberra called Mawson. And obviously Mawson, an amazing Antarctic explorer. And every street around me was named after Antarctic explorers. And there's a bit of a story to this that relates to your shed story. One of my great memories as a young kid, maybe 5 or 6, is climbing up onto the roof of the shed and then jumping off the top of it was the carport, the garage, jumping off the garage onto the ground. And I remember doing it so many times that after a while I couldn't walk because my ankles were so sore. But one of the other great things about where I grew up, I lived on a street called Hoadley Street in Mawson with Sir Douglas Mawson. At the top of my street was Shackleton Circuit. And every single street had a little plaque on it that spoke about each of the Antarctic explorers that the streets were named after. Now, you had a real fascination with Shackleton and with Scott. What was it about these Antarctic explorers that fascinated you?
It's a good question, Sam. I think like we learnt about them at school, of course, because they were heroes in Britain. Um, and I was fascinated by them, but I was also fascinated by the place. It seemed so remote. It seemed so far away. It seemed so crazy. It seemed so expensive to get to. I lived vicariously through their experiences, but I always imagined I'd never get there. I thought this is just a place I'll never get to. However, I was always fascinated with it, much more so than the Arctic. And although I live in Canada now, I'm still much more fascinated with the South than the North. But really, it's not much more complex than that, actually.
Fair enough then. So, were there any early signs of adventure growing up?
There were. I mean, and in the Scouts, we did some climbing in North Wales. We did some hiking. We did bike rides and things like that. But it was really only in my 20s that I really took up um, with much more adventure and just going outside my comfort zone whenever I could. And I think I appreciated it. I got a high from it, literally, and I decided to pursue that in conjunction with accounting. So really, I designed that dual lifestyle to see if I could have both, you know.
So, Ian, you're an accountant. Most people are really starting to climb the corporate ladder, through their 20s. They've got their whole life mapped out. But instead of climbing the corporate ladder, you decided to climb Kilimanjaro. Where did that come about?
Kilimanjaro came about because I had the opportunity to work in Africa for a while. Worked in Zambia and then traveled through Africa afterwards with a group of people. And Kilimanjaro came up as an idea. Why not? I'd never been above 4,000 feet, didn't know how I'd do. Bought some boots, rented some gear, got a ride to the start in an old Ford Zephyr with some locals that took us there, which was fun. And went up and down Kilimanjaro. And it was really a great experience unto itself. But the other thing it taught me was one, I can deal with the altitude. I seem to deal with it pretty well. And this is something I can do as well as of having life as a finance person. So from then on, I really had a dual life. I took lots of time off. I gave up a lot of career moves for the sake of adventure and to try to treat both things as part of my life. Super important. And I did it for 40 years.
So, why was it then that this trip really changed everything for you?
Because it showed me something that I've never seen before: high altitude, and the highest peak in the UK is 4,000 something feet. So I'd never been above that, and so it really gave me that opportunity to say, okay, this is what high altitude mountaineering is like, or could be like, and it led me to look at the seven summits, and led me to look at what's next. What can I do? How do I do that? How can I become good enough to climb some of those or all of those peaks? And um, and it fascinated me because it gave me that tremendous goal to seek for and to push myself, as well as the financial life, which more or less I really enjoyed, but it gave me the money to do that. So it was a dual life that I led from then on.
You mentioned the seven summits. Explain to the listeners those who aren't aware what that is.
Seven summits are the highest peak on each continent. So you've got Everest, Vincent Massif in Antarctica. You've got Aconcagua in South America, Denali in North America. You've got Elbrus in Europe, and you've got Kilimanjaro in Africa. So I was trying to knock these on the head with the reality for me that I was never really good enough for places like Mount Everest. So it was never really going to be the seven summits. It was going to be, let's see how many of these things I can do. And the interesting thing was, it's for me, moving on is very important as you come to certain stages of your life. When I was in Antarctica and I've been to the South Pole, I was really under a lot of pressure to go and climb Mount Elbrus. It was like a 20-minute flight away. It's not that technically difficult. I could have done it, but I was so exhausted and injured. And also that was a separate part of my life. I said no. It was not what I wanted to do at that point, despite the fact I was so close to Mount Elbrus. Sorry, to Vincent Massif.
Speaking to someone like Andrew Locke, the first Australian to climb every peak over 8,000 meters, and funnily enough, a friend of yours,
Right.
there's so many dangerous moments in climbing these peaks. What were some of the scariest moments when you're doing these seven peaks?
I think one of them was first attempt on Aconcagua, where we came across two climbers that had died in a storm on the way up. We just about managed to get down. But also, I think the pure adrenaline fear of standing on the summit of the Matterhorn in Switzerland in a storm and having to find your way down, knowing that a lot of people have died doing that. And it was white knuckle all the way down, right through, walking through Zermatt with our climbing boots on, squishing water out and all that stuff. But that was really that was really on the edge, and felt we really could have died at that point. We shouldn't have been up there, and we were, but I really felt that was very much, we were on the edge there. Yeah.
One of the things with mountaineering, and having spoken to several people about it, death is always there. Whether it's other climbers who have died, or people who are close to death. When you see these moments of death around you, what makes you keep coming back to do it again?
Interesting question. When I saw the unfortunate guys in Aconcagua, um, it was very sad, and yet it didn't put me off. The thing that put me off eventually from mountaineering was at Mount Elbrus in Russia, where I fell about 300 feet down an ice and a cliff, and nearly died, and realized that if I kept doing this, bad things can happen. That's what eventually made me look elsewhere for my adrenaline rush. And for me, it was the right thing to do. I had a wonderful time chasing those mountains in my earlier time, but it was the right time to move on also. So that is what freaked me out, if you like, is when I had a close call and realized the next one might be a bad call.
That was one of the questions I actually posed to Andrew Locke about some of his climbs, because he recalled some stories where an avalanche came down and took out 3 or 4 of his climbing party. And if he was just a foot or two in one direction, he would have been part of that as well. And life is so precarious when you're in those moments. How do you prepare yourself physically and mentally to be able to take on those kinds of challenges?
I think the challenge is very much within, actually, Sam, as opposed to the mountain. You hear people going to conquer a mountain, but I think the only thing you find out more about is yourself on the mountain. And I think you have to come to terms with your own level of acceptance. You don't think you're going to die on a mountain, but you 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 try and reduce the risk as much as you can. I'm a very big planner, and plan every eventuality I can think of, knowing that things are going to come up anyway. But the more you can eliminate, the better chance you've got. And be aware of, sometimes it's good to turn back. Have that experience when you're a bit older to realize this might be a good time to go down.
Most people, listening to this probably think you're batshit crazy. But you describe yourself as an ordinary guy. You're doing batshit crazy stuff, which is really what the podcast is all about. Why do you describe yourself as an ordinary guy?
Well, that's great. I'm certainly not an Olympic athlete. I'm not anything particularly special. However, what I can do is actually go pick something and do it. If you ask people in the village, and or people that I know very well, he's a guy that can make the ridiculous sound normal. And that's what I try to do. Okay, this might sound completely mental. However, it's not really if you break it down. And that's how I choose these things. I choose something that I want to do, not that I can do. I can't do it yet. Then you design how to do it, and you figure out how to do it and give it your best shot. When I'm talking to school kids, I tell them all the time to go and fail spectacularly at stuff. And the teachers don't like that always, but I don't mean school, but go and fail. Pick something that you've never done before and see how you get on. And if you do that, pick something else.
There must be many times on expeditions you're halfway through and just go, oh, this was a mistake. What moments have you got like that?
This was a mistake. I think bad weather on Aconcagua the first time I was with Andrew's brother, David, actually. Yeah, so we really arrived at the wrong time, and it was a really bad idea. We were all sick. It was the end of the climbing season. We found these two dead guys and thought, I think it's time we went down. And it really was a bad idea. So I went back a couple of years later and climbed to the summit. But yeah, there's one of those. And sometimes just standing, like when I was in Antarctica going to the South Pole, I would stand in the middle of Antarctica with absolutely nothing around apart from me and a sled and think, I wonder what I look like from space, you know? And this is really cool. This is really cool. It's scary as hell, but it's really cool to think where I am. Think about it. How fortunate am I? And then you just keep going.
It is really quite a privilege to be able to undertake these adventures. Lisa Blair, one of my past guests, had a catastrophic event in the Southern Ocean. She was sailing solo around Antarctica to attempt to set the fastest record for that. And she was dismasted about 900 nautical miles south of Cape Town. And she realized that the closest humans to her at that moment in time were those on the International Space Station. And it's just such a moment in time when you realize where you are.
You're alone.
Now, you many of your expeditions have been with teams, you know, climbing parties, those kinds of things. But I want to talk about one of your solo adventures, which was cycling across Australia. Now, I live in Australia. Australia is a bloody big place. We span 3 time zones. It's an overnight flight from one side to the other. Why, firstly, did you decide to ride across Australia?
Great question. I'd never been. That was one reason to go to Australia. I was always fascinated by it. I also had some very good friends there. I had a David in Perth and a David in Sydney. So I thought, well, why don't I cycle between the two Davids? That would be cool. But it was as simple as that, really. But the other thing that I wanted to do, I'd done tons of expeditions with people or with teams. And I thought, let's really crank up the degree of difficulty by doing it alone. Let's pick something I'm doing alone, and it's a place I've never been, and it's hard. And that was cycling the 5,000 kilometers from Perth to Sydney. And that was a whole different dimension, but it was such a wonderful experience because the people you meet along the way when you're alone is far greater than when you're in a team. And you really meet these people and they understand it and welcome you, usually.
So I assume this was your biggest adventure as a solo event. How did it really shape you?
Um, I think it added to what I'd done already. It's a good question, actually, Sam. I hadn't really thought about that too much before. What it made me realize is you can do this stuff on your own and enjoy it. You know, I thought, wow, am I going to be lonely? Is this going to be tough? Is it going to be this? It was all of those things. However, I think you become tougher doing it on your own because there's no support network. When times are bad, there's no one to talk to apart from yourself, and you do that way.
You're riding across the Nullarbor, which, for those who don't know, the Nullarbor is famous actually for alien sightings, and maybe because it takes you about 2 days to drive across it, and it's just flat Australian desert. When you're in these moments, riding across the Nullarbor, you're probably riding 8-12 hours a day. Where does your mind go?
Well, it's very interesting, and I liken it to Antarctica as well. A lot of people listen to podcasts, a lot of people listen to music, a lot of people do various things. The most enjoyable days I've had on these big expeditions is thinking about absolutely nothing and just having a blank mind when you start out from the tent or you start out on the bike, is letting your mind go wherever it wants to go. It's all okay. Whatever your mind does is good, and it goes to some amazing places. And I think and before you know it, you've been cycling 6 or 8 hours. That would drive some people crazy.
Did you have music or anything like that to distract you?
Occasionally, but not often. What I like to do on a bike is hear the sounds of the tires on the road, of animals, of things that are going on, and also of road trains, which
Yeah,
is
you need to hear those things coming.
yeah. You can
It's
usually see them in the mirror about 10 miles back, actually.
They're massive. Uh, it's interesting. I find a lot of my long training, sort of 6 hour ocean swims, those kinds of things, really quite meditative. When I'm swimming, I'm counting every breath and I count to 10 and then start again. Count to 10. And so out in the ocean for 6 hours at a time, most people go, that's the most boring thing on the planet. And they're not wrong. However, when you break it down of just having something in your mind, like counting or just letting your mind wander, it makes the time pass really fast. And so I got to a point where I'd stop every 30 minutes for a feed, whether it's a drink or something like that. And it really only felt like about 5 minutes. Did you have a repetitive process in your mind that just kept going over and over and over again?
Yeah, I've done that as well, and I think what grabs me about these expeditions very much so is the simplicity. That we live in a very complex life. We live in a very confusing life, I find sometimes, and the demands are things often that you don't want. When you're on an expedition, you're biking across Australia or you're walking to the South Pole, life's very simple. The goals are very simple. And I think I thrive on things like that. It may drive some people crazy, but I do, and I do count as well. Yeah, if I've got a big hill on the bike, I count how many pedal strokes I think it's going to be. Yeah, pretty close. Okay, and I get through it that way. So we all have our coping mechanisms.
Uh, One of the things I love is stepping outside the comfort zone. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I did a solo hike. It was a weekend long hike, about 40 kilometers. And I've done a lot of hiking in my time because I love hiking, getting out into the Australian outback, the Australian bush. And but I've never done one solo. And I thought I'm going to go try a solo hike. I was actually a little bit nervous getting out into the Australian bush by myself, just wondering, where's the mind going to go? But up all these hills, walking across ridges, going through creeks and waterfalls, everything like that. I had one of my most enjoyable weekends ever. And at the end of it, I felt so proud of myself. And it seems ridiculous. I've done some really crazy stuff in my life, but it just seems so ridiculous. But what I was proud of was I did something that stepped me outside my comfort zone. You're a big person on teaching people to step outside your comfort zone. When you get someone to do that, what does it really start to teach them?
I think it teaches them that anything's possible. And I can be that person I want to be. I don't have to be a bystander. I don't have to be someone that lives vicariously through other people. I'm capable of it. And that's what I try and tell people. If you can ride a bike, if you can put a tent up and if you can cook yourself dinner and you can do it the next day, you can ride across Australia. You got to do it 60 times, but you can do it. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. It's not crazy. It's something you may have done some already. So go out there and do that. And I think the more you're outside your comfort zone, the richer your life will be.
That repetitiveness of these adventures of turning up every single day. And you're right. When you break it down, riding for 8 hours, 10 hours, pitching a tent, making your own food, getting up, doing that the next day. If you can do it one day, you can do it 5 days, you can do it 60 days. And at the end of 60 days, you've ridden 5,000 kilometers across a pretty harsh landscape, which is Australia. And doing something that most people would say is impossible. One of the things that really I just wanted to get you on as a guest, Ian, apart from doing all these amazing adventures, is that you started up a film festival because so much and so many people that I've interviewed have had this spark. They've seen a documentary. They were at a pub and someone gave a presentation about climbing Mount Everest, these kinds of things. You're in your garage, you had a projector, and you showed some films to some mates. Why did you think that you needed to start a film festival?
Good question, actually. The reason I wanted to start the film festival, or the reason I had an idea it might work, is the place we live is festival culture rich. It's a very interesting place in Canada. We have a time in November that's very quiet in the village. And I've run an adventure club here for many years, and I thought it was a natural transition from that where why not? Let's try it. Let's push the boat out and go beyond your comfort zone. I'd never done anything like this before. I'd been to film festivals. Our film of the South Pole, my film Lunatic, had played in lots of film festivals and would be to film festivals. And I could see what a film festival would do for a small town. And people would come out inspired. Our goal is to inspire people of all ages to see ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And that's what we want to do. All ages. We want to keep the price down, and we want people to walk out of there happy, smiling, and inspired to do something that they've never done before. It's really as simple as that. We're growing like crazy, and this we want this to be a world-class adventure film festival in a village in Canada.
Okay, now the name of the film festival, it's Allura Adventure Film Festival. Obviously, Allura in Canada. Is there a theme to each year for the films, or is adventure open slather?
It's open. My wife and I select the films in our garage. We debate, we cry, we look at, we argue, and we end up with a great schedule. And to me, it's got to be an emotional roller coaster. And they're all short films. So the maximum length's 30 minutes, the minimum's 2 minutes, say. But it's an emotional roller coaster where there's some crazy stuff and then some emotion. And then this year we had a 97-year-old marathon runner. We had a guy sailed through Antarctica with one arm and one leg, solo sailor. And so we had everything. And we had a guy doing some crazy stuff, skiing across roofs in France. So it's everything that goes, but it's not all testosterone loaded. There's some inspiring people of all ages doing things. And that's what it's about. It's that mixture. People love the mixture.
It must be such an amazing experience for you and your wife to sit in the garage to vet all these films that get thrown at you. At the end of that whole process, do you just feel inspired wanting to get out and do something new?
Not really. I think we feel tired. And because we've looked at these films so much that I've seen them so much that at the end of the day I forget what I've seen, actually. So not really. However, I'll tell you when it does hit you is when I'm standing in front of the audience of up to 200 people in some of these screenings, and after the intermission, they're all smiling. And there's the vibrancy in the room, the electricity makes me super motivated to make this a big success. That's what it does for me,
Absolutely.
because I can see what it's doing to people visually right in that room.
So effectively then, the film festival is your new adventure.
Correct. It's part of it because I'm still doing stuff. However, it's a very good observation because as I get older, I'm 69 now. Why not transition somewhat to something I can still do when I'm 95 if I can get on the stage?
Brilliant. You're effectively curating all these stories. You had a film that came out called Lunatic about your Antarctic expedition. How did that really shape your belief in storytelling?
That was an expedition unto itself. Even after the expedition, to get the film made by a wonderful local producer, and it did well on the film festival circuit. But I think it really was the portrayal of an ordinary guy doing extraordinary things. Ian, chartered accountant, lived in a small town in England, came to live in a small town in Canada, done some crazy shit. However, he's done this thing by going to the South Pole, and he's gone back to being an accountant again. So, however, I'll expand on that if I can a little bit, Sam, because the accounting I did for 30 years wasn't accounting. It was looking after companies that were almost bankrupt. So these companies would come to me. They were transport companies, almost bankrupt, and I would have to try and straighten them out and refinance them. And it's almost the same as going on a big expedition. And I lecture now about why is walking to the South Pole like a day in the office? Because it is. It's all the same stuff.
Because it is.
Yeah, it's the same stuff. It's the same challenges. They're written in different names. They've got a different hat on. However, it's the same challenges you face. And so you can pull from one to the other. I've learned from the finance experience and the expedition experience to make me who I am and what I do today.
The films that you're showing, they're all designed to light a fire in someone. Now, some of my guests, pretty much most of my guests, had a spark ignited in them because Andrew Locke, for example, was at a pub and some bloke turned up to to give a presentation about climbing Everest. Aaron Linsdau, Ed and Aruch, uh, the same thing. Someone turned up to their town and gave a presentation about rowing across an ocean or skiing to the South Pole. Lockie Smart, the youngest person to fly solo around the world, saw a story on 60 Minutes here in Australia at the age of 15 and then turned to his mum. He wasn't a pilot. He'd never flown a plane and said, Mum, I'm going to fly around the world. And he did. And it's these little moments that can ignite something so important. You said your goal is to ignite a spark in people with the film festival. Have you seen that happen?
Everyone says it has. Yeah, a lot of these people live from out of town, but that's what everyone tells us, our friends. It's inspiring. It's inspiring. It motivates them to want to do stuff, and I think that's where we're at with it. And I think as long as we can do that, and people have fun, it's a tremendously fun weekend as well. I think that's really what it's all about, and to enable us to grow it. But I learned this a long time ago, Sam. When I fell from Mount Elbrus, I came home, became divorced from my first marriage, lost my job, all in the space of 60 days. I thought my world had ended. And to cut a long story short, I made myself use a whiteboard and come up with what I want to be. And I found out very quickly I'm a corporate vagabond. In the normal sense of the word, I'm unemployable. And I have to create something using my skills to become in demand, hence seeking clients out to restructure companies that were almost bankrupt. And that enabled me to have this dual life even more so. And that's when I cranked up the adventure. I wanted this dual life and I found a way to design it.
On that, then, you describe yourself as this ordinary guy. People really seem to be drawn to ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Why do you think that is?
Because I think they may see themselves in it. And they may see their own life in it. And they may think, well, I could do that. I've never been winter camping, but I probably could do that and not die. So let's go do it. And I think that's why people love the festival. They want the entertainment, but they see themselves on the screen.
Do you think it gives people hope?
I think so. I hope so. Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Because it just shows people that anything's possible. Anything's possible. You don't have to be you don't have to be talented. You don't have to have any specific talents to do this stuff. You just got to work hard and think it through and get on with it. Like if you're going to cycle around the world, don't look at your navel for too long by finding the right bike. Whatever bike you've got, fix it up and get going.
Just start. It's the hardest part is always getting out the door, isn't it? What's been the most surprising reaction of someone from the film festival?
That's a great question. Most surprising reaction, positive. We're talking here, right?
Yeah, of course.
Mostly positive. I think an appreciation for having the vision to bring it to a place like Elora and to be part of the village and to be part of the cultural scene in the town. And yes, they're inspired, but I think they love the concept of having a film festival in Elora that's inspiring. And I think I've actually fitted it right into the cultural scene of the village. And that is what people appreciate.
Do you think that the film festival is there for entertainment, or is it really part of a deeper mission that you have?
Both. For sure, it's both. People want to come. They want to be entertained. They want to have fun. They want to go to the pub and talk about the films and compare. But I think when they go home and think about it, then that's where the inspiration starts, and people really think about. People talk about it for weeks and weeks afterwards. I go to the pub and people start talking about some of the films, and I think it's a two-level process. One, it's entertainment on the true level of the sense of the word, but also it's the inspiration by making you think. I can do this. I can do stuff like this.
You've shown dozens of films over the 3 years that the Allure Adventure Film Festival has been running. Is there one that really struck the greatest chord with the audience and yourself?
Um, One that struck the greatest chord with me, I think, would be a family from the UK that climbed the toughest peak in Norway with their two young children, and because we're talking serious climbing here, overnight, multi-day climbing, and it struck a chord with me because it really showed what they can do with a family, and the parents talked about why they're doing it, and the parents talked about what the kids are getting out of this, and the kids seemed happy doing this crazy stuff. And I think that created the biggest impact for me because that is what it's all about. That was super extreme, but it doesn't have to be that extreme to have the same effect.
What was the name of that film?
2.4. It's on YouTube.
All right. Yeah, I need to go find that straight after
Two,
this.
two, two point
2.4.
two point four. It's an excellent film, and the guys, the people on it are wonderful. And you have to like the people in the film, I think, to enjoy the film. And we like the family a lot. There's many others that are great, but that one to me summed up what it's about, being a family and young kids.
Sounds absolutely amazing. Now, and you know the show is called Why Do You Think You Could Do That? Uh, and you've had this amazing career of just doing so many batshit crazy things. So, firstly, I want to ask you this question. What made you think you could ski to the South Pole when you're 60?
Because I'd had lots of opportunity to have adventures that built up to it. It was like a stepping stone, I felt, getting to there. Um, I was always passionate about it. I wanted to go, and that was it. Could I do it? I'd just figure out a way. Because once I'd got the opportunity to go, I was selected to go on the team of 4 guys. I thought, well, I'm just going to find out how to do this. And I trained like crazy. Everyone calls me a lunatic in the village because I dragged the truck tire around the town for 4 months training for the South Pole. And that's why they call me lunatic. And that's why the film's called Lunatic. But that is essentially as simple as it was. I had the opportunity to do this, and that was as far as it went.
Does the belief come first, or does action build belief? Or is it more that all of the things that you've done in the past ensure that you have belief in yourself to go and do something like this?
A bit of all of the above. It's something that, what am I going to find out about myself by doing this? Can I do this for myself? I'm not really doing it for anyone else, or I'm not doing it to conquer anything. What can I find out more? How can I be a better and deeper person by doing this? What can I find out by doing this crazy thing? And by picking something you can't do, that makes it much more difficult.
So many times people are after an accolade, they're after a medal, you know, be the participant and end with their finisher's medal or the shirt. All of these adventures, and many of them go unnoticed. And you're obviously not doing them for anybody else apart from yourself. And we have just one life. And so many people these days are wasting it, sitting on their phone, doom scrolling on the couch, because it's so much easier to get that dopamine hit from a 5-second stupid video than getting out the door and making things happen. What is your approach then to making this the greatest life you could have ever have imagined?
Because I think it's you don't want to say what if, as little as possible, and I think you want to go just as far as you can. How can I get not get the most out of life? How can I get the most out of me? How can I create a life for me that I'm super satisfied with, and I feel that I've tried my absolute best. When I was at the South Pole at 60 or close to 60, I was pretty much way past the comfort zone, way past my capabilities physically. I had to go to places mentally that I didn't know exist to succeed. And that made me realize, okay, that you've gone too far this time. Definitely.
Now, look, and surely you're sounding pretty superhuman. Surely you've got an inner critic who says, this is too much. You're too old. Who do you think you are? Do you have that inner critic?
Not before or during, no. Ever. After, yes.
What do you mean after?
Well, my wife tells me.
Love the honesty.
Um, no, I tell myself too. I realized that it was the South Pole was a step too far. I still did it, but it was a step too far. Really, I was way, way past my comfort zone. I came back with a version of PTSD for sure because of where I had to go to be successful. Which made me realize that, yeah, I'd probably I was 20 years too old, really.
And you're 69 now. If you look back over your entire life and all the brilliant things that you've done, I have to ask you this question. Why do you think you could do that?
Why did I think I could do that?
Yeah.
My daughter says I'm too stubborn to quit. So that's one reason. But I do think things through and logically try and make a building block of things that I try and achieve in life. And I think all those things are building blocks. And the film festival is the culmination of that, really, where I'm the right person to run this with my adventurous background, and we've had a film that's done well in film festivals, and I live in Elora. So people look up to me for that. And immediately you have that respect. And so I'm looking forward to that as a super long-term adventure for us as a family living in Elora, where people from around the world will come to it. We want thousands of people in
Absolutely.
Elora. That's where I want to
Absolutely
be in
brilliant.
20 years' time.
Fantastic. Now, I want to bring this back to the listener, Ian, because seriously, not everyone's going to summit a mountain, but everyone has their own summit. What does adventure mean to you today?
I think adventure to me means to me today, it actually means something different than it meant a long time ago. Like the second time I crossed Australia, for example, there were actually three of us on that trip, and we followed in the footsteps of John McDouall Stewart, the first explorer to cross Australia and live, I believe. And we followed his track and camped in his campsites, which was wonderful. For me, it actually is much more important to follow history and add a depth to an expedition now than it ever used to be. It's not so much the A to B, it's more it's A to B, but what happened on that A to B 300 years ago, 200 years ago? And so I've mellowed a lot in that attitude of let's add something else to this level of expedition.
Now, someone who's listening, what is one small thing do you think that they could do tomorrow to really spark their own adventure?
Here's something I did that you could do as well. My wife and I planned an expedition a few years ago. We had all our backpacks ready, big backpacks. In the end, my wife couldn't go for whatever reason, so I walked out the front door, down the main street, down the river into the middle of nowhere, and camped for 2 days. Had a wonderful time and hiked and walked all the way back. And I had an expedition, I had an adventure, and I didn't cost me anything, and I walked right from the front door. So why can't you go and do that?
Absolutely. That was like my little solo trek that I did the other weekend. Cost me $7.50 in a
Yeah,
camping permit, I think,
yeah.
and maybe the chicken schnitzel afterwards at the pub. Do you think people these days are hungrier for adventure?
Not necessarily hungrier. I think people are hungrier for travel, and I think people are hungrier for. I hate to use the word bucket list. I despise that such statement, but people are after a list of things to check off. Whereas we go and do things because it's a great experience and we want to do it. We may do it again and again. I'm not sure they're hungry, or I'm not sure about that. It's different than it was 20, 30 years ago.
Do you think much of obviously everybody's just after the dopamine hit, the quick fixes these days with doom scrolling. How does someone break that cycle, do you think, to just go from sitting on the couch to just go, bugger this, I'm wasting my life?
I think go off the grid. I mean, find somewhere where you're literally in the middle of nowhere. There's no point in doom scrolling. There's nothing to scroll. So I think you have to forcibly put yourself in that position where you are in the middle of nowhere, where you are inaccessible, in and out, and then you'll find out a lot about yourself, and you have much deeper adventure experiences because also there's no hope for rescue. You're really
You're
gone
right.
alone. So you can't pick up the phone and say, "Well, yeah, I'm done now. Get me out of here." So I think that is what people need to do to get adventure is to just go off the grid. It's harder and harder today, but we try and do that when we can, and it's rewarding.
One of the interesting things is that my partner and I, we try and teach our kids boredom. We take their phones off them because they're annoying us. And so many people these days are unable to seek out adventure because you, you and I, growing up, adventure occurred generally because we were bored, wanted to go off and do something. Now, how often do you see boredom as a great impetus for adventure?
Not at all. I don't think so. I think the people that are bored are going to be bored anyway, and I think the people that want to go and do stuff are going to go do stuff. Is my
So then,
experience.
how does someone then just become that person who just does stuff?
Because they could be inspired by the film festival. They could be inspired to realize that there's a lot of other things going on, and these are not athletes doing this stuff. These are people that may be super unfit. They may be large people or very old people, and they're still out there doing stuff that they can't do or aspire to. So I think those are the people. When I talk to a big audience, usually a third of them get it, a third are indifferent, and a third don't care. And so you're never going to get the third that don't care under any circumstances.
So then, what would you say to someone who thinks that their time for boldness has passed?
I'd talk about me and I'd talk about a 97-year-old marathon runner. It's never passed. It's
Why do
never, it's
people
never,
think that?
I don't think it's ever passed unless you let it pass. You know, I think, I think the way to stop it passing is to keep doing crazy shit. The more you do that, that keeps you young mentally and physically. And I think it sounds flippant, but it's not actually. It's exactly what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and we're coming towards the end of the conversation. I always love to throw in the Brave Five. It's the rapid fire 5 questions. 5 questions that don't necessarily relate to anything else. So basically, it's the first thing that comes to your mind. You ready?
Anytime.
All right, let's go. The most unexpected lesson you've learned from an expedition.
Unexpected lesson would be in Antarctica and how much injury can play on an expedition and how it can destroy your dream or make it harder.
What was the injury?
Before I started off to the South Pole, I had plantar fasciitis in one foot and the other foot swelled up so I could hardly get it in my boot. So I had 2 feet that weren't working with 700 kilometers still to go. And I had to find a way. Hence, I ended up
That
with,
sounds
I ended up with
painful.
PTSD. Yeah. So that was the hardest thing I've ever found. I did all the training. I dragged the tire around the countryside for 4 months. I was fitter than I'd ever been. Didn't think about
Wow.
injury.
All right. Okay. Second question, a place you can't stop thinking about.
Um, Chile and the Atacama Desert
Boy,
because I want to go there next. And
but
and
you
as
haven't
you,
been
and as,
there.
and as you know, Sam, the best expedition is the next one, right?
Oh, absolutely. All right. What's the hardest moment to come back from?
The hardest thing was when I was 40, became divorced, lost my job, and nearly died on Mount Elbrus. I had no money, and I was sitting in the basement of a house where the our value was declining every day. And I sat with my whiteboard that I still got here. Actually, the whiteboard's right there. Still got it. 30 years
Oh,
later.
brilliant.
Um, and I figured out what I had to do. That was the toughest moment to come back from, and was the most rewarding recovery that I've ever had. And I treated that like an expedition.
All right. Now, what's one item you always pack that is usually not on anybody else's gear list?
A cutout of an aeroplane my daughter gave me when she was 5 as the best dad ever. And
I love that.
it's been on all these expeditions. It's been to the South Pole and it's been everywhere. But one of the other things is, I'll expand a little bit on that if I may. And when I went to the South Pole, I took some mementos from my parents that had both passed away, and I buried them within a couple of miles of the South Pole with a letter I wrote to them. And so that was very dear to me too. And I just felt that I should take them along for the trip, you know?
Oh, it's beautiful. All right. The last question of the best of the Brave Five, the best advice you've ever received on or off the mountain.
The best advice I've ever received, I think, was when I was a chartered accountant in the UK, and one of the senior people was an ex-army man. His name was Ian Carruthers. I don't know where Ian is right now. But he taught me the true discipline of completing a project, and pre-Excel spreadsheet days, on how to make sure you cover off every eventuality and think of everything that could possibly go wrong. And I followed that advice, and I've done it ever since, and it works well. But you never catch everything. Something always goes wrong anyway, but you've minimized it. And I think that's where you become comfortable with the uncomfortable, where you
I think that's a very important point, and that many of my guests are engineers, accountants, you're very analytical people. And, I'm a civil engineer by trade, and you really cannot say that we come from the most exciting professions, but we're out there doing some of the most exciting stuff. Do you think that being an analytical person allows you to have this big dream, but then break it down to what do I need to do today?
Absolutely. Yeah, it helps tremendously. We can achieve things that other people wouldn't be able to achieve because they wouldn't have the patience, and they wouldn't have the skills to break it down and break it down into manageable.
Can someone be taught that then?
I think so. For sure. For sure you can be taught it. Some people may be receptive to it and some may not be, though. I think you've got to be receptive to seeing the results of that. And the more and more I plan, the better I feel about an expedition, because it enables you to enjoy it more. You're not worrying about the things you didn't think about because you've thought about them all, you think.
Yeah. Now, one of the things is obviously you love stepping outside your comfort zone. So I want to ask you this. What does bravery mean to you?
It doesn't mean to me any of the things that I do. I think bravery is being able to, let me phrase this right. I think it means carrying out what you say you're going to do, and also being able to adjust as it gets difficult. In other words, you're brave enough to make those decisions. And I think sometimes the bravery may be in terms of quitting something. I think another bravery side that I treat myself is, it's okay to move on. When the horse is dead, get off, for example. So if something isn't working, it's okay to move on. You're not quitting, you're moving on. And I think it's brave enough to say, I'm going to move on to something. I have my pilot's license. I flew a plane for 25 years, really enjoyed it. A couple of years ago, I said, I'm done with that. And so I'm okay with it. I didn't keep going. And I think I'm a better person for that, being able to move on to other things that I really enjoy. It's a one-time event. Let's do stuff we really enjoy.
Absolutely. Ian Evans never set out to be famous. He didn't need a finish line or a medal. He just needed to know what's possible when you stop letting fear drive the sled. In chasing cold places, he warmed people's imaginations. In telling stories, he gave others permission to write their own. And in a small town cinema, he created a portal to the extraordinary. Maybe you'll never ski Antarctica or bike across Australia, but maybe after this conversation, you'll look at the world a little differently. Maybe you'll wonder, what would happen if you stopped asking, why me, and started asking, why not? And for those who want to follow your journey or support the festival, where can they find you?
2 places. ianevans.ca is my website. And secondly, the film festival is aloraadventurefilmfestival.ca.
Brilliant. I'll make sure I put those links into the show notes. And if this conversation sparks something in you, share it, because sparks spread. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just take the first step outside your front door. I'm Sam Penny, and this is Why Do You Think You Could Do That? Until next time, keep chasing your edge.